What if punishment wasn't about death, but domination? What if your body became a living warning to every woman who dared to defy the order of men? Picture this. Deep beneath a stone fortress, a chamber forgotten by time. The air is cold, heavy with damp earth and whispers of suffering. Along the far wall, beneath the dim, trembling flame of a dying torch, stands a creation both haunting and mesmerizing. From afar, it could be mistaken for armor, elegant, curved, meticulously forged. But its proportions betray its secret. This was never made for battle. It was sculpted for submission, built not for a warrior, but for a woman. Every line of iron mirrors the contours of the female body. It wasn't designed to kill swiftly, but to prolong agony, to humiliate, to destroy the spirit before the flesh. Turned pain into spectacle, suffering into a warning. This wasn't justice, it was theater. A performance of terror to remind women that silence meant safety and obedience meant survival. Before we descend deeper into this grim chapter of history, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Here at Royal Sleepy Archives, your support helps uncover the hidden truths that history tried to erase. Because these instruments, conceived by men, blessed by faith, and fueled by fear, speak volumes beyond metal and fire. They expose how cruelty was sanctified, how pain was disguised as purity. But who built them? And why did Europe remain silent for centuries? To uncover that, we must step back, to a time ruled not by logic, but by fear, doctrine, and control. In medieval Europe, women lived under an unyielding hierarchy. According to church teaching, she was not man's equal but his burden, weak in spirit, dangerous in flesh. Her body was believed to be the doorway to sin itself. The shadow of Eve's defiance darkened every woman's life. Her curiosity was rebranded as treachery, her hunger for knowledge as rebellion. Thus, the logic followed. If she could tempt, she must be contained. If she could think, she must be silenced. The pulpit preached it, the courts enforced it, and generation after generation the world obeyed. Feudal law offered no sanctuary. Women who stepped beyond obedience faced branding, whipping, or far worse. Her crime might be speaking too freely, dressing boldly, rejecting a suitor, or being accused by a jealous man. Her body became both the evidence and the sentence. In this world, torture became an art form of control. And as fear of women deepened, the methods of breaking them grew more refined, more personal. Among these tools, none struck deeper terror or symbolism than the breast ripper. At first glance, it looked almost primitive, for iron claws curving inward like a beast's talons, fixed to a handle or tongs. Sometimes it was heated until it glowed, a demonic bloom of red metal hissing in the air. Then, without mercy, it was clamped upon the flesh and torn away. Skin, nerve, and bone shredded in a heartbeat. It wasn't merely execution, it was annihilation. Death might come later. The message was immediate. The act was often public. In marketplaces and squares, women were stripped, bound, and displayed before the eyes of neighbors who once knew them. Their pain was transformed into warning. This is what happens when a woman disobeys. Records from 14th century Germany describe one such horror, where a woman, accused of poisoning her husband, had her breasts torn from her body before she was hanged. Manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum even instructed inquisitors to target women where they have sinned most, turning anatomy itself into an excuse for brutality. But beneath the blood lay meaning. The breast, the giver of life, the nurturer of the innocent, became the site of punishment. It was the desecration of creation, a statement that even life itself could be weaponized against its giver. To destroy the breast was to destroy womanhood. Yet, in some corners of Europe, cruelty evolved again. Pain was no longer enough, it had to be hidden, internal, unseen until too late. Enter the pear of anguish, a small, gleaming device shaped like a delicate pear. At rest, it appeared harmless. But turn the screw, and its metal petals would unfurl. Slowly, silently, spreading inside the body. Each twist widened the torment. It was never used on thieves or soldiers. It was reserved for those whose sins were whispered, not witnessed, women accused of abortion, of desire, of independence. Versions were made for the mouth, the womb, the rectum, but when used against women, it most often targeted the very essence of creation. Bound in a cold stone room, a woman would face the priest's silent gaze as the torturer turned the crank. The sound was faint, a grind of metal, a gasp of disbelief, then silence until the scream broke through. She might live but never whole. Speech slurred, womb destroyed, body forever marked as a warning. This wasn't about confession. It was about control. These instruments were not tools of faith but of erasure, designed to crush what men feared most. A woman who could speak, think, or choose. The pair silenced her womb, her voice, her soul. But not every woman screamed. Some endured. And for those who survived, society had an even crueler punishment waiting. Something they would wear not just in darkness, but in daylight, in their homes, even in their dreams. Imagine being locked inside your punishment, breathing it, wearing it, living it. A prison shaped not by walls, but by the contours of your own body. From a distance, it looked almost noble, like armor sculpted to guard the female form. Curved plates of iron wrapped tightly around the ribs and waist, glimmering like a knight's breastplate. But this was no defense. This was the weapon. This was the iron corset, a device not for war, but for obedience. It did not last hours. It lasted days, weeks, sometimes months. A cage disguised as clothing, forged to crush defiance one breath at a time. Screws, rivets, and bolts locked it in place. Some were lined with spikes that pressed into the flesh with every move. Others were weighted, dragging the spine downward, collapsing the chest. Breathing became labor, sleeping nearly impossible. Beneath its iron embrace, bruises bloomed like ink stains. Ribs cracked, lungs struggled, organs slowly compressed. Yet death was never the goal, it was submission. The corset wasn't reserved for criminals. It was punishment for defiance, for daughters who resisted marriage, wives who spoke out, servants accused of laziness, women suspected of impurity or simply too visible for a man's comfort. Unlike most instruments of torture, this one traveled with its victim. It wasn't confined to a dungeon, it became her dungeon. She cooked, cleaned, walked through crowded markets, every step slicing pain through her body. Her breaths came shallow, her waist cinched in steel, her heart beating against her cage. In France, young girls were forced to wear them as moral correction. In Germany, wives were fitted into them by order of their husbands. No court, no jury, only metal and silence. But the true cruelty wasn't just the pain, it was the transformation. The corset twisted the idea of femininity itself. What was once grace became confinement. Beauty became a weapon turned inward. The body, once sacred, became a battlefield. The punishment was the garment. Imagine not just enduring pain, but wearing it day after day until it became part of who you were. And for those who dared to speak too loudly, who questioned not only men but the laws written to cage them, there awaited something even darker. A device designed not to bind the body, but to muzzle the voice. They called it the scold's bridle. Forged entirely from iron, it was shaped like a cage for the head, a grotesque mask of silence. Straps clamped around the skull, across the cheeks, under the jaw. But the cruelty hid inside, a sharpened spike that pressed against the tongue. The moment the victim tried to speak, it cut deep into flesh. It didn't aim to kill, it aimed to erase. Women were paraded through the streets wearing it. Bells attached so every step announced their humiliation. Laughter followed them. Men jeered. Children pointed. Women turned away. Their crime? Speaking out. Arguing. Complaining. Gossiping. Existing too loudly. In medieval Britain and Scotland, it became the go-to punishment for women labeled scolds. A word that meant whatever a man wanted it to. Court records from 16th century Edinburgh describe countless bridlings. One woman silenced for speaking during church. Another for arguing with a neighbor. There was no defense, no appeal, only silence. The message was clear. A woman's voice was dangerous. The spike wasn't just steel, it was symbol. It pierced through centuries of knowledge, of stories whispered from mother to daughter, midwife to bride. Turned speech itself into a sin. Inside that iron mask, identity dissolved. No expressions, no words, only breath echoing in the hollow chamber. A cage meant not to kill her body, but to rewrite her soul. And when the bridle was finally removed, some women never spoke again. Not from pain, but from choice. Silence had become safety. Yet the most haunting truth is this. The scold's bridle left no visible scars. Only shame. Only the memory of how quickly a woman's voice could become her greatest crime. And then came the legend. The most infamous of all, the device that history still whispers about. The Iron Maiden. A towering sarcophagus, its doors lined with spikes, said to close around the victim in a deadly embrace. A kiss of iron and blood. For centuries, it's been displayed as the ultimate symbol of medieval cruelty. But what if the truth is even darker? What if the Iron Maiden was never real at all? Modern historians have uncovered no evidence of its use in the Middle Ages. No court records, no testimonies, no trace of its supposed victims. The first known Iron Maiden appeared centuries later in 18th century Nuremberg, built not for torture, but for tourism. A gruesome invention crafted by curators, not executioners. And yet the myth persisted, growing more perverse with every retelling. Artists imagined female versions, curved, sensual, their interiors lined with spikes placed in obscene precision. These weren't instruments of pain, they were fantasies. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling truth of all. Because they weren't forged in iron, they were forged in imagination. In a world where the suffering of women was both moralized and eroticized, the idea of the Iron Maiden became its own kind of violence. Museums still display them. Guides still whisper the same morbid tales. We still pay to stare at the imagined agony of women who never existed inside them. Because the myth feeds something older than history, it feeds our fascination with female suffering. It tells us that pain, when worn by women, is art. That silence is virtue. That obedience is safety. But reality needs no legend. History already holds enough truth to chill the blood. The breast ripper, the pair of anguish, the iron corset, the bridle, each designed not for justice but for control. These weren't random horrors. They were systems, approved, justified, even sanctified, used to remind half of humanity that their bodies were not their own. Every spike, every strap, every screw whispered the same message. Obedience is survival. Silence is virtue. And as we gaze upon these relics, whether real or myth, we must ask ourselves, what kind of world invents machines just to break women? Because forgetting these devices means forgetting the women they destroyed. So, if you want more stories like this, truths buried beneath centuries of silence, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. History isn't always kind, but remembering it, that's how we stop it from repeating.